Now, we left off with you, Catherine, talking about how you should really know your farmer, and then you were getting into how you should really know your banker. Yes, absolutely.
So these three women were sitting around, all good friends. One had her money in a local bank that was shipping its money to the correspondent large New York bank. She was getting about 4% on her money at the time. Yields were much higher. The second woman had her 401k, IRA, both 401k and IRA, and she had her money in the stock of the same New York bank. And their third friend, and remember, I'm getting them talking about their money. It turns out their third friend was borrowing on her credit card. She started a business using her credit card, and right after that, it was a credit card of the same New York bank. The bank jacked the rate up to 23%. So the first two women are making about 5%, and providing their capital, their life savings to this bank, and one of their best friends is borrowing it back at 23%. Now, what's wrong with that picture? Why do we need a bank thousands of miles away, or over 1,000 miles away, to get in between three friends in a way that's raking off huge and hideous profits? Well, that's an opportunity. And in fact, there was one website that got started, Prosper.com, which was allowing or set up to help people loan directly to each other. And of course, the boys shut it down. So another question is, where is the opportunity to not be intermediated by the big institutions and find ways of making more money and keeping the cash flow in either our networks or our neighborhood? Let's say we did everything, Jason, we could. We demonetized, we bought our generator, we started loaning to our, let's say we did everything we could do just ourselves and our networks. Then the question comes down to, okay, now how do we start taking political action? And in addition to who's your farmer and who's your banker, a very important question in the 2010 election is going to be, who's your sheriff? Because, in fact, if you look at the legal construct upon which the republic was founded, the most powerful person in your county is not the President of the United States and is not even your governor. It's the sheriff. And literally the federal government cannot do anything outside or against the Constitution. If your sheriff says no, you may not. They're the ultimate word within that jurisdiction. And we're going to have Richard Mack. I don't know if you've ever had Richard Mack on InfoWars, but we're going to have Richard Mack, who's a retired sheriff in Arizona, who's written a lot about this question and in fact, took the federal government to court, went all the way to the Supreme Court and won. He's going to be on the Solari Report in January. And so I just cringe when I see people spend money and time on the presidential elections when they're completely ignoring who is their sheriff and their political representation in their own local area, in their town.
Well, I always tell people that they need to start locally, and if they truly do want to change the system, perhaps it's time for them to run for city council or state senator or even a congressional spot. But, of course, the sheriff is a very, very powerful position and an electable one. So right. If you don't like what's going on in your county, it's time for you to run for sheriff.
Well, but the other thing is, the sheriffs can do an awful lot if people will support them. And a lot of the politics comes down to the Fed throws a lot of money. The more dependent we get on federal money and the more the feds control the cash flow locally, the more everybody won't support their sheriff and standing up. And that's why it's got to be battled out in the cash flow. The next place you need to go after who's your sheriff is to look at, okay, let's look at where the governmental money is going. We're paying taxes, and that tax money is going someplace. Is that money circulating into the businesses that create employment and opportunities for us so that we are neighbors own? And I just want to use an example of what's been happening, because if you dig in and you look at the federal, state, and local governmental flows, all resources, not just contracts or expenditures within a place, what you discover is there's enormous opportunity to lower the burden to taxpayers in a way that creates much more income locally for us. And let me give you a perfect example. I live in Tennessee. We have about 20% of the population now on food stamps, huge part of the federal flow through in the Tennessee state budget. It's over $1 billion now. So 20% of the people on food stamps in a state where we have fabulous farmland, beautiful farmland that's just sitting, not doing anything. it turns out, Jason, that we are outsourcing the data servicing and customer support work on the food stamp contract. In Tennessee, it's true in Florida, other states, to, are you ready for this? J.P. Morgan Chase in India.
Oh, how lovely.
Now, we have counties in Tennessee where we have 25% unemployment. So the federal and state governments are paying people to not work and paying for their food stamps when they are also paying J.P. Morgan Chase to do jobs that these people could do. Now,
well, that's why those arguments never stand up that, oh, they don't want to take these jobs. No, you're not offering them to people. You're moving them overseas and making it impossible for them to do this work.
Well, in fact, data servicing jobs are wonderful jobs for many people. If you are someone who has responsibilities for caring for children or for elderly parents or both, data servicing jobs can be beamed in, you can beam them out to lots of different sites locally. And they can be done in flexible hours, so you can get very high productivity with flexible hours in sites that are closer to home, even residential. So, in fact, it doesn't make any sense to beam those jobs to India because there is a way to do them here, which is enormously wonderful for a workforce that literally cannot get in a car and commute an hour into Nashville or Knoxville or, Tampa or Orlando, because they have to take care of, and it's certainly much more economic for society to have them care for their family members than to try and institutionalize that. So if you look at the fundamental economics, you'll see again and again, and I saw this, I served as the Assistant Secretary of Housing, and I would often see communities where we were spending $250,000 per unit to construct public housing when $50,000 would buy and rehab a single-family home. So we were paying 5 times per unit of what we needed to. And in fact, in the Clinton administration, I took that example. It was New Orleans where this situation, the fact pattern was just outrageous. I had first seen it in Chicago. I took it to the assistant of the person who ran that program at HUD, and I said, look, if we just re-engineer the money, we could get 5 homes for the price of 1. The person turned bright red and looked at me and said, but how could we generate fees for our friends? So when there's a bubble going on, Jason, everybody's happy to generate fees for our friends. When you turn to people and say your children can't have health care because there's not enough money, it's time to look at 50 years of accumulated fees for our friends and say, maybe we need to re-engineer how things work, because we've had decades of computers and new technology, and yet the overhead costs of fundamental government projects have skyrocketed exponentially, and that's because we are subsidizing a huge infrastructure, the biggest piece of which is these big corporations, because you give a big corporation a government contract and you drive their stock up. So there's real, capital gains on stock market and real estate is the primary source of political contributions. And it starts, though, in your own county saying, okay, let me get control of my local representatives, whether it's my sheriff or town council or state representative, make sure we have excellent people in office, but then let's look at the money and let's look at where we're paying 5 times for, of what is needed, and where we cannot re-engineer the money to get a much better result in terms of expenses down and income up for the people here in a way that reduces the load to taxpayer. And I tell you, those opportunities are absolutely there.
We're going to open up the phone lines for Catherine Austin Fitts in just a moment. But first, I want to get your take on gold being at a record high today. Where is the roof on this thing? Are we going to see it go up above 1,300, 1,400, maybe even hit 1,500? Where do you see gold and precious metals going?
If you go back and you look at the high in 1980 before the current high,
mm-hmm.
and you say, okay, gold traded at 800. Even above, but the close was 800. So gold traded at 800 in 1980. If we were going to say, okay, how much was that in inflation adjusted dollars? Because we've had enormous inflation from 1980 until now, so it's almost 30 years of inflation. But in current dollars, what was that 800? Depending on who calculates it and what series they use. Do they use a government series, or, for example, John Williams Shadow Stats has redone the government numbers. So do we use the more reliable numbers like John's for the CPI and the inflation? Mm-hmm. What would $800 be in current dollars? You get estimates of anywhere from $2,500 to $7,500. Mm-hmm. And so what we're looking at today with a price of approximately $1,200 is something that is less than 50% of where the high was in 1980. So on an inflation-adjusted basis, Jason, we're nowhere near the high. That's number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, the challenge we have with precious metals is that it's a very tiny market relative to the global stock or bond market. And I mean, the global bond market is huge, and then you add derivatives. So if a tiny bit of money decides it wants to shift into precious metals, you're talking about enormous pressure to drive the price up.